November 15, 1315, a narrow mountain pass in central Switzerland. The morning air is cold enough to freeze your breath. Duke Leopold I of Austria, called the Glorious, nicknamed the Sword of the Habsburgs, rides at the head of 8,000 men, knights in full plate armor. Horses draped in heraldic colors, weapons glinting in the weak sunlight. They're marching through a pass so narrow that only 3 horsemen can ride abreast. On their left, the steep bank of Lake Egerie drops into dark water. On their right, the forested slopes of Morgarten Mountain rise like a wall. The knights are laughing. This isn't war. This is pest control. They're here to crush 700 peasants armed with farming tools. The mood is festive, like a hunting party heading out for sport. Their armor alone costs more than most villages produce in a year. Each knight has trained since childhood. These are medieval tanks, the elite warriors of the age, supposedly unstoppable. In 30 minutes, 2,000 of them will be dead. Only 12 Swiss will fall. This is the birth of the Swiss military legend, and it begins with logs, rocks, and a tactical trap so brutal that it changed warfare forever. Before diving into how 700 peasants obliterated an army more than 10 times their size, if you enjoy learning about the forgotten massacres that shaped history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. The story starts not with battle, but with cows. The year is 1314. The Einsiedeln Abbey sits in northern Schwyz, a Benedictine monastery protected by the House of Habsburg. For decades, the abbey has been expanding its cattle operations, claiming more and more grazing land. The subsistence farmers and shepherds of Schwyz watch their pastures disappear into abbey territory. Generation after generation, the resentment builds. The abbey operates with allodial status, meaning it answers to no feudal lord, only to the Holy Roman Emperor himself. The Habsburgs exercise patronage over the abbey, which in practice means they treat it like personal property. On January 6, 1314, that resentment explodes into violence. Werner Stauffacher, the magistrate of Schwyz, leads 300 armed men down the mountain and straight into the abbey. They don't politely knock, they smash through the doors. They raid the food stores, drink the monks' wine, demolish holy altars, and burn every legal document they can find. They drag 9 monks out as prisoners. This isn't a raid. This is a declaration of war, and both sides know it. The Bishop of Constance excommunicates Stauffacher immediately. The House of Habsburg now has the perfect excuse they've been waiting for. These mountain peasants need to be reminded who rules Central Europe. But here's what the Habsburgs don't understand. The Swiss aren't peasants in the traditional feudal sense. They're something else entirely. The forest cantons of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden exist in a geographic and economic anomaly. The terrain is too mountainous, the soil too poor, to support the feudal system. No local lords can extract enough surplus to maintain power. Instead, these communities operate as free farmers and shepherds, fiercely independent, bound together by mutual defense pacts rather than feudal obligations. In 1291, they formalized the Everlasting League, a mutual defense treaty. They don't bow to lords, they elect their own leaders. Every able-bodied man trains with weapons. The mountains themselves are their castles, and in 1230, everything changed. The construction of a wooden bridge across the Schurlenen Gorge transformed the St. Gotthard Pass into the shortest viable trade route between Germany and Italy. Suddenly, goods flowing through the forest cantons generate enormous income for the Holy Roman Empire. Emperor Henry VII of the House of Hohenstaufen saw the danger immediately. If any noble house seized this strategic chokepoint, they'd control the wealth of 2 kingdoms. So in 1240 and 1243, he declared the cantons of Schwyz and Uri free from imperial authority, protected status, allodial territory. The forest cantons became untouchable by design. The Habsburgs spent the next 70 years trying to undermine that protection. By 1315, the House of Habsburg controls massive territories across Austria, Styria, Swabia, and northern Switzerland. They've accumulated power through conquest, marriage, purchase, and relentless pressure. Rudolf IV, the first Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor, famously grabbed so much land that the Bishop of Basel said, "Hold onto your seat, Lord, or else Rudolf will surely grab it." The Habsburgs hold their possessions collectively, never splitting inheritance, which means the family fortune only grows. And they want Schwyz. The Einsiedeln raid gives them the justification. Duke Leopold I arrives in Baden in October 1315 with a contingent of heavily armored Austrian knights. He's 25 years old. Born and raised in Austria, he's an experienced commander with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He issues orders to every town under Habsburg authority, send troops. He calls upon allied nobles, bring your retainers. The rendezvous point is the city of Zug, November 14th. The objective is simple: crush Schwyz, make an example of the rebels. Show the entire Holy Roman Empire what happens when peasants attack their betters. Leopold plans a three-pronged assault. He'll lead the main force against Schwyz from the north. Count Otto von Strasbourg will conduct a diversionary raid through Brunig Pass against Unterwalden. The militia of Lucerne will outfit a small armed flotilla to threaten Schwyz from Lake Lucerne. The strategy is textbook. Isolate Schwyz, prevent reinforcements from Uri and Unterwalden, and crush the main force in a single decisive engagement. Leopold holds the Swiss in absolute contempt. He proclaims his intention to crush the unruly rustics under his feet. These aren't soldiers, they're an armed rabble with wooden sticks. The Swiss scouts report every movement. Werner Stauffacher receives word in early November. He knows the terrain, he knows Leopold's mindset. And he knows exactly how to kill 8,000 men with 700. The geography of Schwyz is a defender's dream and an invader's nightmare. Multiple approaches exist, but they all funnel through narrow valleys hemmed in by steep mountains. The Swiss have a tradition of building letzi, massive fortifications of earth, logs, and stone that block valley floors. The letzi near the town of Arth is nearly 3 miles long, 12 feet high, reinforced with 3 towers. The letzi at Rothenthurm is similarly imposing. These aren't improvised barricades. They're permanent defensive works maintained across generations. Stauffacher deploys his forces carefully. The bulk of the Unterwalden and Uri militias remain in their home districts to guard other approaches and maintain communication chains. Schwyz, being the most threatened, stages 1,300 men north of the town of Schwyz, reinforced by 300 from Uri and 100 from Unterwalden. Total field force, 1,700 men, but Stauffacher has no intention of using them all at once. He leaves the Letzen at Arth and Rothenthurm heavily garrisoned. Those passes are blocked, but there's a third route. The road through Saddle at the foot of Morgarten Mountain remains open. Only a 40-foot observation tower stands at the hamlet of Skornen, just inside the Schwyz border. No letzi, no fortification, just a watchtower. Leopold's scouts report this information back to the Duke. It looks like an oversight. It is. Stauffacher has left the trapdoor open. If Leopold takes the bait and marches through Morgarten, the Swiss can position their ambush force on the forested slopes above the pass. The terrain is perfect. The pass is hemmed in between Morgarten Mountain on the east and Wildspitz Mountain on the west, with Lake Edgery on the north side and marshy ground where the Trombach Creek flows into the lake. The road is narrow. Knights can only ride 3 abreast. There's no room to deploy. No space to maneuver, no escape. Leopold takes the bait. In the early morning hours of November 15, 1315, Leopold's column leaves Zug, 2,000 cavalry, 6,000 foot soldiers, a massive wagon train full of supplies. The knights are resplendent in full plate armor, lances held high, heraldic banners snapping in the cold wind. The mood is festive. This is sport. The infantry trudges behind, and the wagon train brings up the rear. The column stretches for miles along the narrow road. The road from Zug to Saddle runs along the eastern bank of Lake Edgery. November cold bites through the air. The road is narrow and icy. As the column passes through the hamlet of Haselmatt and continues south, the hillsides on the right grow steeper. The lake presses closer on the left. The knights aren't worried. They're still in friendly territory. They don't expect opposition for miles. Stauffacher has positioned his men overnight. Roughly 700 Swiss fighters crouch in the forest on the slopes of Morgarten Mountain. They're unarmored except for a scattering of steel caps and leather breastplates. Most wear simple leather jerkins marked with the white cross of Schwyz or the black bull's head of Uri. Their weapons are halberds, long swords, military flails, and crossbows. But their real weapons are the logs, boulders, and tree trunks they've positioned during the night, held in place with ropes and wedges. And they're wearing crampons, metal spikes driven through hard leather, strapped to the bottom of their boots. On the frozen, icy slopes, the Swiss move like mountain goats. The Austrians will slip and fall. Picture the situation. Leopold's vanguard approaches the hamlet of Morgarten. The column is compressed, cavalry riding 3 abreast, infantry packed behind, wagon train somewhere in the distant rear. The morning sun glints off armor and weapons. The knights joke with each other. Some discuss what they'll do with their share of the plunder. This won't take long, then they see the barricade. A small obstruction of logs and rocks blocks the road ahead, nothing impressive. A handful of knights dismount to clear it. Annoying but trivial. 50 Swiss crossbowmen rise from behind the barricade and from the slopes above. At close range, crossbow bolts punch through plate armor like parchment. The leading knights topple, pinned to the ground by the force of impact. Horses scream and rear. The men behind press forward, bunching up. More knights try to scramble up the hillside to flank the crossbowmen, but their armor weighs between 50 and 60 pounds. The slope is steep and icy. They slip, fall, and are picked off one by more bolts. The Austrian column starts to compress. More knights arrive at the barricade, unable to see what's happening ahead. The road is too narrow to turn around. The press of bodies and horses grows tighter. Stauffacher gives the signal. The Swiss cut the ropes. Logs, boulders, and entire tree trunks come thundering down the mountainside. They don't roll. They plummet, gaining speed, slamming into the packed Austrian column with the force of artillery. Knights and horses are crushed instantly. Others are knocked off the road and into the lake. Plate armor doesn't float. Men in full harness sink like stones, thrashing as the freezing water fills their lungs. Some are pinned under falling logs, screaming as their ribs crack and their limbs shatter. The column erupts into chaos. Men of Uri blow massive war horns called Harsthorner, the sound reverberating off the mountains like the roar of demons. The main body of 700 Swiss mountaineers charges downhill from their hidden positions on the ridgeline. They don't march. They sprint sure-footed on the icy slope, crampons biting into the frozen ground. They slam into the compressed mass of Austrian knights like a tidal wave. The halberd is a two-handed polearm with a straight-edged axe head, a spear point on top, and a spike or hook on the back. In the hands of a powerful man, it can puncture plate armor, crush helmets, and dismember limbs. The Swiss aren't trained knights. They're farmers, shepherds, woodcutters, men who swing axes to cut timber, who haul boulders to build walls, who climb mountains carrying supplies. They're strong, and they're angry. They cleave the knights like butchers working a slaughterhouse floor. A halberd's hook catches the edge of a knight's breastplate and yanks him off his horse. He hits the ground hard, stunned. Before he can rise, another Swiss drives a halberd spike through his visor into his skull. Next to him, a knight tries to swing his sword, but there's no room. He's hemmed in by his own men and horses. A Swiss with a military flail, a staff weapon studded with iron spikes, swings it overhead and brings it down on the knight's helmet. The spikes punch through the steel. The knight drops. The knights can't bring their lances to bear horizontally. They can't spur their horses to charge. They're trapped in a press of bodies, immobilized by their own formation. The Swiss wade into them methodically, hacking, stabbing, crushing. The frozen road becomes slick with blood. Count Wilhelm II von Montfort-Tettingen, the commander of the Austrian vanguard, dies in the first minutes. His bannerman falls next, the Austrian colors trampled into the gore. The knights in the middle of the column panic. They try to turn back. They ride through their own infantry, trampling foot soldiers who can't get out of the way fast enough. Hundreds of infantry are pushed over the edge of the road and fall into Lake Egerie. Most drown immediately. A few thrash in the freezing water, screaming for help that never comes. Plate armor drags them under. Some Swiss chase the fleeing knights down the road toward the rear of the column, emerging from the forest to attack the wagon train. Teamsters abandon their wagons and flee. Swiss fighters methodically slaughter the wounded Austrians they find. Duke Leopold, somewhere near the front of the column, realizes the battle is lost in minutes. He tries to rally his men, shouting orders that no one can hear over the screams and the clash of steel. His knights are dying. His infantry is routing. The mountainside is vomiting peasants with halberds who fight like demons. Leopold turns his horse and fights his way through his own ranks. He escapes with a handful of mounted knights who manage to break through the press and gallop back toward Zug. Johannes of Winterthur, a 14th-century chronicler whose father survived the ambush, wrote that Leopold was seen riding away from the battle half dead from extreme sorrow. The slaughter continues for less than 2 hours. The Swiss don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate ransoms. In traditional medieval warfare, knights captured in battle are valuable commodities. A noble prisoner means ransom money, sometimes enough to support an entire village for a year. The Swiss ignore this custom entirely. They kill every knight they catch. Wounded men are finished off with daggers or clubbed to death. There's no mercy, no quarter. This isn't chivalry. This is extermination. By killing knights without regard for wealth or status, the Swiss make a social statement as powerful as their military one. They're saying, your titles don't matter here. Your armor doesn't protect you. Your training is worthless. You're just meat. When the fighting ends, 2,000 Austrians lie dead. Some sources put the number higher. At least 1,500 Habsburg soldiers are confirmed killed. Most of the Austrian knights are dead. Hundreds more drowned in Lake Egerie. The survivors flee to Zug in a disordered mob, discarding weapons and armor to run faster. Swiss casualties, 12 dead. Let that sink in. 12. Johannes of Winterthur wrote, "This was not a battle, but a mere butchery of Duke Leopold's men, for the mountain folk slew them like sheep in the shambles. No one gave any quarter, but they cut down all without distinction, till there were none left to kill." Local legend claims so many men died in Lake Egerie that the water turns blood red at midnight every November 15th. Archaeologists have found artifacts at the site: 2 knives, arrows, a scabbard, a cavalier's spur, and 12 silver pfennigs. The coins are on display at the Bundesbrief Museum. The Swiss still commemorate the battle every year, but the massacre wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I find it incredible that we're exploring this forgotten moment of history together, connected across centuries by our shared curiosity about how 700 men slaughtered 8,000. If you're still watching, you're a true history enthusiast. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these stories alive. Now, here's where the Swiss turned victory into legend. On December 9, 1315, less than a month after Morgarten, representatives of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden met in the village of Brunnen. They renewed and expanded the oath of alliance they'd made in 1291. The resulting document, called the Pact of Brunnen, is the foundation of the modern Swiss state. For the first time, the word Einsiedeln appears, meaning confederacy. The Swiss aren't just 3 cantons anymore. They're a nation. The defeat sent shockwaves through the Holy Roman Empire. Peasants had destroyed a feudal army, not just defeated them, obliterated them. The psychological impact was enormous. If the Swiss could do it, who else might try? The Habsburgs didn't learn the lesson. In 1339, the city of Fribourg, controlled by the Habsburg-allied Kyburg family, besieged the Bernese-held village of Laupen. The Friburgers assembled 3,000 cavalry and 12,000 infantry, reinforced by Burgundian and Austrian knights. They wore resplendent armor and new surcoats, glorying in their power. Bernese Knight Rudolf of Erlach led a relief force of Bernese troops reinforced by men of the forest cantons. The Swiss formed 2 columns and advanced on the enemy position. The Friburgers held high ground on a wooded hilltop called the Bramberg. The Swiss attacked uphill. The right column, consisting of Bernese troops, smashed into the Fribourg infantry and drove them off the field. The left column, made up of forest canton troops, faced the Habsburg and Burgundian cavalry. The knights charged downhill into the Swiss pikemen and halberdiers. For a moment, it looked like the cavalry might break through. Then the Bernese right column, victorious but exhausted, wheeled and attacked the knights in the flank. The combined weight of both Swiss divisions shattered the cavalry. The Friburgers suffered 4,000 casualties. The Bernese lost 1,500. The Swiss took home 27 captured banners as trophies. Bern joined the Confederation, then Lucerne, then Glarus, Zug, and Zurich. By 1353, the Confederation of the 8 cantons existed. The Swiss were expanding. Still, the Habsburgs didn't learn. In 1386, Duke Leopold I, nephew of the Leopold who fled Morgarten, assembled 4,000 troops drawn from Swabia, Tyrol, and Alsace. He marched south toward Lucerne. The Swiss fielded 3,000 foot soldiers led by Petermann von Gundeldingen. The 2 armies met near the town of Sempach on July 9th. The Austrian knights charged downhill into the Swiss pikemen. Initially, the knights inflicted heavy casualties, but the Swiss held. They absorbed the charge, regrouped, and counterattacked. During the brutal melee, Duke Leopold I was killed. The Austrians lost 1,000 men. The Swiss lost 200. The Battle of Sempach transformed the Swiss Confederation into a serious military power. Other cantons rushed to join the alliance for protection. The Swiss developed new tactics, refining the pike square formation that would dominate European battlefields for the next 2 centuries. Swiss mercenaries became the most feared infantry in Europe. Kings and popes hired Swiss guards because they never broke, never retreated, and fought to the last man. The final battle between the Swiss and the Habsburgs came in 1499 during the Swabian War. The Swiss won decisively. Switzerland gained full independence, outliving both the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg monarchy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the roots of Swiss military supremacy trace back to Morgarten. So what made the difference? Let's be clear about this. The Swiss didn't win because they were better warriors. They won because they understood something the Habsburgs refused to accept. Terrain matters more than training. Mobility beats armor. Desperation defeats arrogance. The Austrian knights at Morgarten were the best trained soldiers in Europe. They'd spent their entire lives preparing for war. Their armor was state-of-the-art, forged by master craftsmen, fitted to their bodies. Their horses were bred for battle, trained to charge through infantry formations. Their lances were 12 feet of ash wood tipped with steel. On open ground, in a fair fight, they were unstoppable. But there's no such thing as a fair fight. The Swiss understood that knights need space. Cavalry charges require distance to build momentum. Armored combat requires room to swing weapons. The Morgarten Pass gave them none of that. 3 men abreast, steep slope on one side, lake on the other. No deployment, no maneuver, just a killing lane. The Swiss also understood that armor has a weakness. It's heavy. A full suit of plate armor weighs 50 to 60 pounds, distributed across the body. On flat ground, a trained knight can move freely. Climbing a steep, icy slope, impossible. The Austrians who tried to scramble up the hillside to flank the crossbowmen couldn't get traction. They slipped, fell, and died where they landed, and the mountains themselves became weapons. The logs and boulders didn't just kill men, they created panic. Imagine you're an Austrian knight. You're trained to fight men, not avalanches. When tree trunks start slamming into your formation, crushing your friends, knocking horses into the lake, your training doesn't help. You're helpless. That psychological break, that moment when elite soldiers realize they're about to die and there's nothing they can do, is what turned a battle into a massacre. The Swiss also had nothing to lose. These weren't professional soldiers fighting for pay or glory. They were defending their homes. If they lost, their families would be enslaved, their villages burned, their independence crushed. The Austrians were there to punish rebels. The Swiss were there to survive. Desperation is a hell of a motivator, and the Swiss had no respect for the rules. Medieval warfare had codes. Knights didn't kill other knights if they could take them prisoner. Ransoms were negotiated, truces were honored. The Swiss ignored all of it. They butchered wounded enemies. They drowned fleeing knights. They showed no mercy, took no prisoners, and made it clear that fighting the Swiss meant death, not capture. That reputation, earned at Morgarten, made the Swiss the most feared infantry in Europe for 2 centuries. But here's the real lesson of Morgarten, and it's darker than you might think. The Swiss won because they were willing to fight dirty. They used ambush tactics, terrain manipulation, and total war against an enemy that still believed in chivalry. The knights rode into Morgarten expecting a traditional battle. They got annihilation, and the Swiss didn't win because they were morally superior. They won because they were more ruthless. That ruthlessness became Switzerland's defining characteristic. Swiss mercenaries, hired by kings across Europe, became famous for 2 things. They never retreated, and they slaughtered everyone. At the Battle of Marignano in 1515, Swiss mercenaries fighting for the Duchy of Milan charged French artillery positions repeatedly, suffering massive casualties, and kept attacking until they were physically driven back. At the sack of Rome in 1527, Swiss guards defending Pope Clement VII fought to the death on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, buying time for the Pope to escape. 147 guards died, 42 survived. They're still the Pope's bodyguards today. The Swiss didn't become warriors because they loved violence. They became warriors because their geography demanded it, and their enemies gave them no choice. Morgarten taught them that survival required total commitment, absolute ruthlessness, and the willingness to turn every advantage, no matter how brutal, into a weapon. Before we wrap up, if you're fascinated by these forgotten battles where the underdog annihilated the overconfident, check out the video on the screen about how Scottish peasants destroyed English knights at Stirling Bridge. Same pattern, different country, same result. So what's the legacy? Switzerland today is known for neutrality, chocolate, watches, and banking. Not exactly the image of bloodthirsty mountain warriors. But that neutrality was earned through 500 years of proving that invading Switzerland costs more than any potential gain. The Swiss didn't become peaceful because they were weak. They became peaceful because they made war so expensive that everyone else decided to leave them alone. The Battle of Morgarten established the principle: don't fight the Swiss in their mountains. The Habsburgs ignored that lesson twice more and lost 5,000 men at Sempach and thousands more in the Swabian War. Eventually, they learned. The Holy Roman Empire, which once claimed authority over all of Central Europe, slowly disintegrated. The Swiss Confederation proved that peasants could defeat emperors. That idea spread. The Protestant Reformation, the 30 Years' War, the eventual collapse of the empire into fragmented kingdoms, all of it traces roots back to the moment when 700 Swiss peasants looked at 8,000 armored knights and said, "Let's kill them all." And they did. Today, if you visit Morgarten, you can walk the pass. There's a small monument marking the site. The lake is still there, peaceful and blue. The mountains still loom overhead. It's hard to imagine 2,000 men dying there in less than 2 hours, their blood staining the water red, their screams echoing off the cliffs. But it happened. And the reason it matters 700 years later is this: Morgarten proved that elite training, expensive equipment, and noble birth mean nothing if you don't understand the battlefield. The Austrians brought medieval tanks to a mountain ambush. The Swiss brought logs, rocks, and a willingness to die rather than surrender. The knights never had a chance, so here's your question for the comments. If you were Duke Leopold, knowing what you know now, how would you have fought the Swiss? Could the Austrians have won at Morgarten, or was the ambush unbeatable? Let me know below. And if you made it this far, you've just spent 30 minutes learning about one of the most brutal massacres in medieval history. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more forgotten battles where the underdogs turn the tables, and I'll see you in the next one. Remember Morgarten. Remember that armor doesn't make you invincible. Remember that 700 peasants with farming tools can slaughter 8,000 knights if they choose the battlefield. The Swiss chose Morgarten, and they won.